joining us for this session, hosted by BCS Agile Specialist Group. I'm your host for this session, Satpal Singh. I'm the chair of the BCS. Got a number of the BCS committee members joining here. If you want to give all a wave, folks. Got Sohair here, Ahmad's here, Craig's here, Martin's here, so a whole group of us. And we're delighted to be doing this event in collaboration with our friends at the newly formed Neurodiversity SG. So really excited about doing this session. Very keen to collaborate with a number of groups. We've done a few of those this year. And this one's important for us for lots of reasons. It's obviously important because neurodiversity is a very important subject. And we're keen to play our part in helping raise further awareness and improve education, and also to support our friends in the newly formed SG, because they've just started up their group. So it's nice to work with them. Yeah, credit to Matthew's here too. Matthew's the chair of Neurodiversity SG, and we're shortly going to be hearing from Marc, who's one of the committee members. So just usual sort of quick formalities, nothing too strict. In short, really, we just ask you all to be respectful and everyone to have a good experience. You know, please, yeah, just bear that in mind. Let's just all be kind to one another. That's what we're all here to do, have a great experience together. We'll do some sort of other community shout-outs and things at the end. We do have other events in the pipeline. And also we can talk a little bit more about what some of our ambitions are for 2023, if you're interested to hear more about that. As I say, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We will pause with our natural opportunities to break, and I'll leave that in the capable hands of our guest speaker. And with that, I'm really delighted to welcome Marc to the session, Marc Goblot. And Marc and I talked recently, and we did a chat with Matthew as well, and we were really pleased to be doing this event. As I said earlier, this is a very important topic for us, and we feel that there's a great need for ongoing education and raising awareness, and it's something we hope to continue to do. This is just the beginning of hopefully a number of series of events that we will continue to do, and we look forward to seeing our friends at the Neurodiversity SG to continue to develop their own plans and have their own program of events, and I look forward to attending those in the future. Marc's got extensive experience in this industry. He's been doing this quite some years. You'll read that in the bio that we've shared as part of this listing. He's an exceptional work. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, so that's very impressive. And I think what's also interesting about this is he's also had his own personal experiences. So I think he's very well placed to talk about some of that, and I'm sure he will share some more of that shortly. And he's mentioned that in his bio regarding some of his experiences supporting his daughter. And I also have similar experiences in that space, so I think we have that in common, which when you got together and started to speak, it was a very natural conversation, and we had that in common, and we very quickly built up a shared desire to do this session and bring this content to you, because as I said, I think we all need to continue to educate ourselves. He's also the founder of Tech London Advocates Tech for Disabilities Group, which is incredible. So there's lots of great alignment here, and I think we all, I'm sure, would agree we have a shared responsibility to continue to socialise a lot of this stuff. And as we like to believe at the BCS, we're here to really help make sure that technology is doing great in society and really supporting society in all the ways that it should. And many of us here are active advocates of that, and very active in the work that the BCS is trying to do across society. So welcome to you all. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Marc. He will share some slides, and then we'll see how we go. But welcome and enjoy the session. Marc, over to you.
Thank you. Right. Just going to share my slides and get my PowerPoint into us. So hopefully everyone can see okay. Great. Let me just close down some of the pictures. Great. So yeah, a meeting of minds, I guess. Yeah, it just sort of popped in my head. the neurodiverse mind and the agile mind. Yeah, let's see what intersections there are. That's something I'd like to talk about a little bit later in this. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm Marc Goblot, so I'm part of the new Neurodiverse IT and a Tech for Disability group with Tech London Advocates, and they basically showcase technology in not just London, the UK, but now they have a global tech advocates network as well, and a few other things. But I'll move on and I'll explain a few things about me as I go. So, whoops. I have to remember when I'm on Zoom to press the arrow down there. So the agenda, just a little bit about me, how I got involved with both tech and neurodiversity. A little bit about neurodiversity, just for those who may not be aware of some of it. Just a few thoughts on, you know, where the intersections might be, as I mentioned. Perhaps there are some agile practices that map well to neurodiverse traits. Something I just wanted to try mapping a little bit, and also some thoughts on how to make Agile a little more neuro-inclusive. And then I wanted to obviously showcase a little bit about our new group. So I thought I'll kind of bring that to the end point, and then we can kind of open things up if that's okay. Yeah, a little bit about me. Just on the tech side, you might have seen already some of it. I guess I was mostly in agencies in London, creative agencies, digital agencies, whatever. A lot of big brands, Diesel, Canon, and so on, Mini. Yeah, I guess that's where slowly over time, this was sort of the 90s really, over time, exploring actually lots of ways of working in such a multidisciplinary place. So in fact, I didn't work in tech companies. I was mostly working in creative agencies, leading the tech teams. So that meant we were having to figure out how to explain stuff, what you can and can't do to people who didn't really understand anything we were saying. You know, a lot of creatives, UX designers, account directors, all that sort of thing. So it was tricky because everyone had their own discipline and their own mindset, and it was a challenge to get across what we're understand what they wanted to do, and for us to figure out what we can do. We're usually at the very end of the chain, as you can imagine, having to be up all night trying to figure out how we're going to use tech to make something work. So with that, you know, we got into all sorts of agile as soon as it started emerging as a thing, you know, with XP and various forms of agile, and of course leading to Scrum and Lean and so on. And it was something we were doing very much in our area, and it was at the time something totally unknown to the rest of the agency as well. So not only were we speaking in a different language, but we were doing things in a whole different way than the rest of the agency. So that was a recipe for disaster at times. Yeah, from there, after a while, I got off that roller coaster after a long time, and I went to Accenture, basically just to expand the canvas in terms of tech, you know, and trying to understand what a corporate's like, global corporates, and that sort of weird sort of world. I guess a lot of tech people are quite used to it, but I wasn't. It was a bit of a shock coming from creative agencies that still have a pretty casual way of working, and then meeting the sort of super strict culture of a massive corporate working with other massive corporates. I mean, I think Accenture at the time had around 480,000 people around the world. And, trying to do Agile there was pretty funny because, most people were thousands of miles away, different parts of the day, with a massive scale. So it was really weird as a culture. Again, more of the same with global brands, government, and all the rest. A little bit more of a focus on consulting, strategy, architecture with these teams. So, it's a change from people management and more into sort of solution architecture and so on. But also just being baffled at the whole different culture of it, being in a corporate like that, which was actually more technical. So I'm just kind of sharing a little bit about myself going through some of this. After a few years, I was ready to jump and go independent. So now I'm in my own independent practice in terms of architecture and digital transformation, focusing on nonprofits, which I'll talk about in a bit. But that was important to, and as you'll see later, for me to be able to get to a place where I felt I was, again, independent, more in control. And then I could get on with a lot of other stuff, as mentioned, in terms of neurodiversity and tech. So just on the personal side, as mentioned, I guess in terms of neurodiversity and autism and so on, I got right into this being parent of a daughter who's now 20. She was diagnosed quite early, like around 2 3/4. That was pretty lucky for them, 2004. In terms of getting diagnosed, that was lucky. In terms of what do you do about it? Not very lucky, and I had to learn the ropes mostly about how services work in the UK, or how they don't really. And and learn the law and basically act as advocate, and do the best I can to help her out and understand what she's going through as she grew up. So that was a lot of firsthand, obviously, experience, both in terms of herself, but also how society works, for somebody who's a child and really has these conditions, doesn't really understand what's going on in the world, what's on offer, is a bit shocking, quite frankly. You got to learn a lot and figure it out for yourself. Pretty much, you're on your own. That's how most of it goes. So you learn to be pretty independent and just learn a lot. Fortunately, I'm pretty good with learning. I kind of love to kind of jump all over something and go deep. That's sort of a typical trait anyway, but a very helpful one. I got involved with the local National Autistic Society. I'm in Greenwich, Southeast London. So I started getting involved with that branch. Thought it'd be good to share what I was learning and hear what others got. So naturally, being in digital, set up a bunch of website and all the usual things. And that got me involved with local government services and into other causes, and including when I was at Accenture, I was part of their inclusion and diversity team as their autism lead in the UK. And I got to know quite a few other corporates actually around the city. with a similar sort of setup, which is first time to start, you know, collaborating and sharing info across big organizations like that. It's quite interesting actually to see what's in common and what's not. And then it was only last year, very late in the day, I had my own diagnosis of autism and ADHD. And that was a pretty massive revelation because, you know, suddenly a lot of things made sense in terms of my career and, you know, all the other things, all the mistakes, all the messes and the good points and the reason why I'm this and that. A lot of this started to make sense having this diagnosis. So some people don't like labels. I understand that. But sometimes it just gives you a bit of certainty, a little bit more clarity, and you can use that. You can use that to understand it and why, and then what do you do about it? Some people have a lot of trouble with getting this late in the day and then looking back at the sort of mess they may have caused. Who knows, you know, marriages, relationships, jobs, whatever. I'll explain how that's linked a little bit later. But I don't know, for me at least, it was more of a positive thing. It was now I know, now I understand, now I can do something after all this time. So it's been more about looking forward. So I don't know if anyone out there has, you know, links to any of these things, or, you know, themselves have been assessed, or maybe we're thinking about it, but it's just worth, you know, bearing that in mind if you're not sure whether it's worth being assessed, if you suspect it or somebody else thinks you are. It might be worth you checking it out if you can. It's not very easy, I'll be honest, especially if you're later in age. There's a real problem with getting assessed, massive waiting list. In Greenwich, it takes 4.5 years on the waiting list as an adult to get assessed for ADHD, and it's 3 years for autism. That's just Greenwich, you know, so may well vary where you are. It's worth knowing. And to be honest, I went private. Most adults like me ended up going private. There's no way you can just wait forever like that. You know, if there's any way you have the means to do so, it will help a lot, you know. One little tip, if you are in a big corporate and you've got private health insurance, you could use that. So the way I managed to do it privately without really paying for it is I still had BUPA from when I was at Accenture. I kept it going and I was able to use it to get through the assessment for both up to diagnosis, at least. So, you know, for anyone who might be thinking about it, that was one way I was able to do it without spending huge amounts of money, you know, so worth knowing about it. So, yeah, with all that, the tech background, the personal stuff, you know, I started thinking, okay, this is kind of interesting. Is there a way to kind of combine these things, you know, tech, neurodiversity, and lived experience, you know? Is there something in that, you know? So I've been looking into that. I need my independent practice for now to keep paying the bills. So I'm trying to, at the same time, use that flexibility to get involved with a few other things. Excuse me. So, yeah, I've been I found myself supporting quite a few neurodiverse, neurodivergent, as we often call it. I'll go into terms later, but entrepreneurs. So in various ways, I've connected up with other sorts of autistics, ADHD, dyslexic people who are keen to explore how they could work with tech to create something with it. And so, I found myself supporting quite a few startups and people in the last year or so. And I'm just trying to think about what that could look like, how that could help build something, get something going. I've also started thinking about, with that lived experience, and same as the other people I've been supporting, we all have our itch to scratch. We get ideas and they come from problems that we actually face, and then we want to figure out how to solve them. And if we know something about tech, let's see what tech could do. So, I'm still slowly starting out my own tech startup with quite a few ideas that I need to develop more. I do need to find some people to work with on this a bit more. So do get in touch if you're interested. I've had a bit of early support from Royal Society of Arts, as mentioned, I'm a fellow there, and also from Unlimited. They're an accelerator for social enterprises. And then I've been, showcasing startups where I can. I've met quite a few through my involvement with Tech London Advocates, having set up this Tech for Disability group. We do these regular inclusive conversations, bringing together the disabled people and the tech community to see, are there a few things we can learn from each other? So that's been going for a while now. It's great because it's helped lead to other contacts. I got to speak in Parliament for the all-party parliamentary group on technology and internet and comms about inclusion in June. And by the way, I just got an invite to their annual dinner in the House of Lords in a couple of weeks. So that's kind of weird, government and stuff, but why not? Let's see wherever we can share some lived experience and knowledge and see if it'll help, why not? So I'm up for it. There's, I also spoke at Tech London Advocates, as I mentioned, is now global tech advocates also. They have a network around the world. Right now, they're doing their global summit in India. So I'm thinking about taking our group more global, because we have a lot of people from around Europe, Asia, and US as well. So that's network at scale. And again, that whole connection stuff is really good. They had a big tech for diversity and, well, what do you call it? I guess inclusion and diversity. That was Tech London Advocates wanted to do a report on, have we progressed on inclusion in technology in the tech industry? Yes or no in the last 5 years. So they had a big event end of March at Plexol, and I was one of the speakers. I think I was the only speaker talking about disability, in terms of this event, which went on, which was 4.5 hours long for some reason. So I appreciate there are a lot of other angles to diversity, but it is kind of strange that things like neurodiversity and disability don't seem to get the same look in on these things as other forms of diversity do, which is quite strange. Anyway, that's all on YouTube Live. I also presented Autistic Research Festival. They convene a research network with all the universities into autism, and I'm quite keen to see how to work with academics doing research in this space as to how that could be turned into something real through technology. So that's another angle. And then obviously, speaking at the last couple of London Tech Weeks through Tech London Advocates. So, you know, a lot of stuff going on there in terms of networking, advocacy, and so on. There's potentially a new neurodiversity hub we may be starting up, and that's something that's sort of like an online advice center for fledgling neurodivergent tech entrepreneurs, as well as a sort of resource hub. Then, of course, there's the new Neurodiverse IT SG. And yeah, we'll talk a bit more about that towards the end. Sorry, that was a bit prolonged about me. I don't usually do it like that, but we'll start diving a bit further now. So all I'm just trying to say, what I've realized is needed in general is there's a need for allowing neurodivergent people to realize some autonomy, because autonomy is really important when you feel disabled a lot by what's around you. That there are ways to get autonomy. It could be through independent working. It could be freelancing. It could be doing your own startup and business like that. It doesn't have to be a traditional employment job model. We've got to start thinking a little bigger now about future of work. And I think the way us, in terms of neurodiversity, have been dealing with the traditional job model, I think we've got things to say about where the future of work ought to be going, and it should be opened up a lot more. There's a lot of stuff around that and other institutions to maybe think about. And the reason is because all these institutions were set up by people who aren't particularly neurodivergent or disabled by society. So that's where the struggle is. So it's time to kind of hopefully open things up a bit more. I do think we've got a really good intelligence for connections to help build up impact networks. I think there are new ways to kind of create working spaces, which I hope to come to again, get to a bit later on in terms of Agile, because I appreciate Agile is parts of it are practices to help with working together as a team. And I think there may be some interest, as I said, there may be some interesting overlaps. So I've been looking at ways to create inclusive workspaces with other neurodivergent entrepreneurs in a way that we both feel pretty safe and they're therefore a lot more creative. We don't have pressures on us. So finding more ways to do that. And then, of course, the big one is let's see how technology can be an enabler, not a disabler, you know? So those are some of the things, you know, want to try to strive for. I'm going to just pause for a second, just in case anybody's commented or asked anything as yet, because I've been bleeding a bit for a while, but if not, I'll carry on, but I'm just taking a breath.
Yeah, no, it's good. So good. It was a good context that you've done there, Mark. There have been comments, and I think Matthew's been augmenting what you're saying, so I think we'll have some good discussions later. I didn't see, there was one right at the end. I think I skipped past it. There is one here from Elle, and I'm hearing some prefer for neurodiversity to be covered in the same bracket as disability, but then I'm hearing some circles buck that and ask that the group is spoken about in terms of difference. A long question. I'm sure there are legal protections that rely on it being classified as disability, do we know what the emergent thinking is on that? Anything you
Yeah,
can share on that at this stage?
yeah, there's the next section I was going to talk about neurodiversity a little bit, but it's a good point. We had this with our group, Tech for Disability, basically there are different models of looking at disability. There's the clinical one, which pathologizes you with a condition, which actually I'll talk about in a moment. But there's also the social model. And you might have heard me the way I've said it a couple of times just before, you know, even at the bottom of this screen, we can feel disabled by society. We could say that we're disabled by society. So it's the other way around. They're doing the disabling in a way. That's a social model of looking at it. So, you know, in terms of, you know, this association of disability, you can look at it in different ways. And, you know, as I say, I appreciate the point. Sometimes there's a legal need in order to get what you're entitled to. And then sometimes there's a social point to be made, but then you're actually flipping it around. You know, I could say that some people are disabling me, you know, I'm disabled by them because I don't get access the same way. Perhaps I cannot navigate institutions like education that impose a top-down approach to how I'm supposed to learn and gain qualifications in order to work. Maybe I want to do it a different way, you know, it could be an autodidact. But you know, I'm told I can't, you know, so there's examples like that, perhaps, that bring up this social model, but it's a really good point, and there's a lot of debate around it, to be sure. I could probably spend quite the whole presentation only on that point, to be fair. It's a good one though. But I hope that makes sense. That's just a few thoughts that I've been hearing of.
Well, we'll have plenty of time to come back to explore that a little bit more in the Q&A. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay. I'll press on a bit. So yeah, just a little bit about neurodiversity. I mean, there is a lot of stuff on the internet about it. I just, you know, grabbed some things out of my head. As I said, I'll probably forget stuff, you know. One of the things I know about ADHD is that it's actually not an attention issue. It's actually an issue of executive functions, the sort of things that give you some controls over, you know, impulsivity and how you retain things in memory while waiting your turn to speak and so on. You know, all these things present themselves in different ways. I'm going to try to give you a flavor of that as I go through these things from a personal level, because there's so much stuff that's out there. It's kind of theoretical, sometimes a bit clinical, as I just said, clinically labeled. But, you know, there's a lot more to it than that. So I'm going to try to hopefully bring it to life a bit more. But in a nutshell, there's the clinical side where there's a number of conditions. They relate to the way the brain is wired. And there may be differences then in terms of how we might process things that come in through the senses, perceptions, how we process thoughts, how they trigger emotions, for instance. So, you know, one example is something comes in, you know, and it hits your emotional center. And if you've got a moment, it gets passed on to a place where you can think about it a little bit more and come up with a proper response. But sometimes it's short-circuited. It lands in the emotional side and stays there and comes out as a reaction from the emotional side. So it didn't get to the thinking part. And that means that you can present in a way that maybe others may not, just because you process something a little bit differently in your brain for various reasons. At the end of the day, these various conditions affect just how they pass things through and how they come out. And so it's, the presentation might be in a way that is out of context for people that are used to people responding in a particular way. I'm just trying to step through it a bit. There is also a point that, and you may not realize it, but so many people are socially conditioned, and you carry that as baggage unconsciously. You expect people to behave in a certain way based on your environment, where you live, your culture, etc. All that kind of comes in and conditions you, and you keep it in the unconscious. And then that brings a lot of expectations to people. And if they respond differently, that could be a bit of a shock as well. So these things all might create various conflicts or gaps. There's a well-known researcher, University of Kent, called Damien Milton, who called it the double empathy problem. It's where we've got this gap. Someone who isn't autistic or ADHD just doesn't have the ability to empathize with where I'm coming from. And I could have the same problem as well. And so we build this problem at each end, and we have a gap, and we need a bridge there. So these are other, illustrations, how we might get disabled. I appreciate that might be inadvertent, or it might be intentional. It's hard to say, but a lot of the time, people bring their assumptions that they've been deeply conditioned with without really, sometimes not questioning them so much. And then they get something they're not expecting, So it's, this happens quite a lot. I'm just trying to bring a little bit of this to life in a general way without getting too scientific. But it's important to say that some of these things gives us some strengths, in terms of ideas, perspectives, and so on, because we may not be as socially conditioned, because it may not have worked on us the same way. We may not have understood it. One example is a lot of people, we communicate with body language. Most of it's body language, 80%. A lot of it also has cultural cues, social cues that are implicit. A lot of people communicate like that, assuming you get this. And if you don't, that's difficult sometimes, but it can also give you a way to maybe bypass some of those things. So some people are kind of caught up in that conditioning without even realizing it, and we may not be. And we're able to sort of bring something up that might have a new angle or perspective in that way, which is how sometimes innovation can happen. And also, a lot of entrepreneurs are actually well known as being ADHD or autistic or whatever, So, there's some strengths to that. It's just being aware of that and figuring out how to harness that, how to channel that. But it's a tough one, because you're working for ourselves. We're working up against the good things and the bad things all the time. And sometimes the bad things, the bad parts hold us back. Sometimes it's other people holding us back. So neurodiversity also gained another dimension beyond just being clinical. It's social. I mentioned about the social model for disability. Well, there's certainly more of a social side to neurodiversity. In fact, it was coined by Judy Singer in Australia, but I actually think there was somebody before her who mentioned it too, somewhere I read. But it was developed as a social model, as a way of being able to self-advocate and create more awareness in terms of diversity and how the mind works, you know. So just repositioning it from a pathological model to something that's just more of a, you know, another framework, you know. The mind is diverse as well in terms of how it works. And getting, with that concept, getting that awareness out in order to be able to help, you know, have people understand it better, but also draw on, and then have the space, the opportunity to do more with the strengths we have instead of dealing with the difficulties. So those are just a couple of things I wanted to mention. And again, you know, this is sort of hopefully revealing some more of that thinking behind this, because it's a social model, not just clinical. And that's where things can be a little confusing for those who, you know, may see it as a medical thing, you know, but it's now being extended a lot further than that, and making people hopefully understand maybe we should be opening up our minds a little bit more, you know, in these ways. There are lots of these charts around, just sort of help bring it to life a bit. You know, I just grabbed this. There's some credits. Sorry, they're really tiny at the bottom, but you know, there are lots of these sort of charts around. I just thought I would grab a couple just to help illustrate, rather than, you know, give you a few ideas. So, you know, as I mentioned, we have conditions like autism. Autism itself is a spectrum. So the S in ASD is actually autistic spectrum disorder, or it's now called condition rather than disorder. So as we speak, a lot of these words change all the time, you know. Some people do not like disorder. So ASD is now also ASC. And so I thought to mention that. But, you know, it gives an idea that there's a lot of overlap between them. I told you they're mostly neurological in origin. And, you know, basically, they have their own sorts of ways of presenting, but there are a lot of overlaps, and often people are, you know, have co-occurring conditions, so to speak. There's another word. The medical establishment often call it comorbid conditions, and that's still in practice a lot, but now they're using co-occurring a lot more. So, you know, the terminology is changing a lot. So I mentioned I'm autistic and ADHD. So, you know, there are many others who are autistic and dyslexic too, and so on. So, you know, they don't have a fine line between them. Sometimes it's quite gray, or nebulous, to be honest with you. There, some ways it presents that are different. So with autism, communication and social things are key issues. The social side for autism is the huge one for me. I really had no idea how to form social groups until I was in my 20s. I really didn't know how. I wanted to. So it's not that you're antisocial. It's just that you don't know how to be. And this is one of those things, it gets portrayed, autistics, they're antisocial, they're asocial, etc. And that's completely wrong, As I said, it is a spectrum, my daughter is autistic too, but she's on a very different place from me. For instance, she has no way of speaking. She doesn't have any language. She wouldn't be able to tell you something. She wouldn't be able to tell you if she's got a headache. She wouldn't be able to understand concepts or even duration of time. If you asked her, what would you like to be in the future? She has no idea what future means. Everything is of the moment. That's all she knows. And that's because it's literal. It's right in front of her. The moment is right in front of her. And that's what she knows. She takes everything literally in terms of her awareness of the world, and her communication is always about the immediate moment. And it's very literal. Anything other than that won't make any sense to her. And then you've got other autistics who are more able to speak, but still have that same issue around taking everything literally, versus understanding anything that's sort of like a metaphor or, a pun or whatever. A lot of these things just, don't quite work, it's worth saying. But having said that, we're looking at the strengths part. I probably should have started with the other one, but anyway, the logical side, the focus side, definitely. There's the sequencing. There's a lot of things that are fantastic, especially for what we do in tech, So there's naturally a lot of people in tech, actually, who, are autistic, ADHD, etc. They're attracted to it because of how tech works, and something about it appeals to, say, the logical side or the sequencing and so on. So to be honest, there are a lot in that industry. Moving forward, here is what they say in terms of difficulties. You see, they've used comorbid in here. So, again, there's a bit of old language in here. I don't, it's worth dropping in because I can call it out, this is what happens all the time. And some of this is wrong. They've learned other things, but, whatever. It's just to give you, a bit of a flavor. So, again, with both ADHD and autism, self-regulation is really tough. Yeah, it is. The way it presents is different, but it's, things like how you feel about something can hit you emotionally from one moment to the next. It can be quite up and down and a roller coaster just on that side of things, just to mention. I don't mean to say everybody is veering between extremes, but it's just that it's not as stable or as steady maybe as what you might be used to, And there's a lot of going deep on things. So you can see this idea about obsessive and autism. Some of it's quite a cliche. The Rain Man, the film, with Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman, you know, making the autistic seem like some kind of wild genius who can, you know, memorize phone books and draw a map of the city from memory or whatever, as a reflection of obsession. I mean, that's cliche. Not very many people are like that at all. But there is something about going deep on an interest and hanging on to it a lot, you know, and that's good and bad. It can bore a lot of people to hell, but it can be extremely useful too. They can go real deep on knowledge. A lot of them may well be some of the best coders or experts in, you know, neural networks you've ever met. You know, they've gone deep on it. They're able to. They can keep absorbing information. They can't even stop, you know, but it's they become great knowledge bases. Here they've got it obsessive, you know, as a downside. It's more, you know, it can be used for good and it can be off-putting for others. So I'm just sort of throwing up some of these things. There's sensitivities too. So for autism particularly, the senses are a big deal. You know, you may hear things very, very differently. You might see and spot and notice things very differently from most people. You would expect walking into a room, everyone is drawn to some sort of part of the room that is a natural attention grabber. And for some people, that just doesn't happen. They'll notice something else that no one else sees. So they'll sense things that you may not, or see things you may not. And they have this as a downside, but that's not always a downside. That means they might see something that everyone else misses. You know, it could be an insignificant detail that's totally overlooked because everyone is naturally drawn to some sort of thing up in lights or whatever. I don't know, you know. Yeah, definitely for autism, the social communication is a biggie. You know, I could not read cues. There, as you grow up as a kid, you're in school, there are all these social cues you're expected to know, and if you don't, you're an outcast. So that was my story, you know, that takes a lot of time to learn. When you're older, you just get better at coping, that's all, or just masking. And then you end up building up this whole reservoir of anxiety underneath it that you just shunt out of your consciousness. So that happens a lot when you're older. So yeah, some of these things you pretty much know, but I just thought I'd bring a little bit of life to it. And hopefully it kind of helps explain a little bit more. So this is a bit of a messy one. I was going to make this a build and I've been playing around with it. But I wanted to just take a moment because, you know, you're a group of people who come together because of Agile and its principles and its practices and the good side of it. And the fact that it is actually a framework, a set of principles, etc. And, you know, I haven't worked this through, and I just wanted to see if there are some ways to map this out. Because one thing is, it's important that you working in Agile understand some of these differences I've been talking about with neurodiversity and, you know, because, you know, Agile means working very collaboratively and in groups and so on. And it's really important that some of this fits in, and maybe there's something about Agile that needs a little bit of, modifying or review, let's say, so it could be more inclusive. But at the same time, maybe there are things in it that might work in some way with people who have traits I've talked about just now from neurodiversity. And I'm just, I'll be honest with you, I'm just not messing about, but I'm still trying to figure this out. And I was just trying to think if there's a way, there are probably different ways to do this with nice visual balloons and all this. So I was just trying to put some words down, see how they might line up or not, and then, take it further. And on the left-hand side were just some things out of my head around Agile. Of course, I missed a lot of stuff. And, I'm just trying to say again, stuff will pop in my head again later. I never know it at a moment if I've got everything. And I'm sure there are plenty of you out there who will think of other stuff. But I just grabbed a few things that might be a good starting point to maybe try mapping across to some of the traits I was talking about. So, in terms of the Agile side, there's the idea of rituals. There's a routine around all that, and it's well signposted. It's part of the practice. The other is around the whole collaboration side, keeping it in small teams, transparency, this frequent, inspect and review, etc. Yeah. And the autonomy, teams are allowed to have autonomy and self-determination. Then the notion of the sprint, where you go into a sprint and the whole idea is that's what matters right now. Let's just focus on that and see where we land. And then there's the adapt and change, the ability to be able to adjust what we've learned and deal with change, as opposed to the waterfall specced out thing. There probably are more things in terms of Agile, for sure, that those are things that came straight out of my head without really thinking about it too much. If anyone has got other things about Agile they think that might be relevant here to help with maybe mapping to some traits, just put them in the chat if possible. If anything pops in your head, love to hear it in there.
We did get one, which I think was a good call out, and it was from Dave. And it asked whether there was a place for tightly defined acceptance criteria.
Yeah, actually, which is really good. On the next slide, possibly, I forgot to put it back in here, but when I moved forward in terms of tips and things that are useful from Agile, which comes after this, there's that also definition of done is another, which I think I would relate also to that. Like the definition of done is also, I think I really appreciate, because it's kind of clear how do you know when you're done? How do you test against that? So acceptance criteria, absolutely. Thanks for popping that in. And I think definition of done is more like a sort of ground rule you have at the beginning, like we want to make sure that in our practice, we've got an agreement on definition of done, and then that's going to be reflected in the acceptance criteria. I think if I remember it, something roughly like that. But that absolutely, yeah, that's something I really treasure, which I'll be coming to in a moment. But thanks for that. I was wondering if anyone else had anything else that strikes them from Agile that might be relevant or useful by any chance. Just curious if anyone wanted to pop anything in the chat.
There was also a nice sort of question, but sort of related point from Elle again around when we teach and coach agility, we often do it through metaphors, and examples, and games and things to bring the ideas to life. So what sort of challenges would typically be faced for those who are, I guess, neurodivergent, and what might be some of the hacks to help make those metaphors and concepts work better? You had much experience with that?
Yeah, that's a cool one. I mean, I spent a lot of time, if I'm trying to figure out what are we solving here, obviously user stories and scenarios, they really help because it brings it to life if you're explaining it like, here's a person who's such and such, who needs to do these tasks so they can achieve this goal. It makes it a little more tangible. I do like that a lot, which is probably something I should have added in here. So when we're talking about examples, trying to make them sound kind of real, so they build a picture almost, in the way that user stories or scenarios can do, is helpful, as opposed to something that's pretty abstract, perhaps. It depends on how we're using this, and where metaphors might come into this. I'm not sure. I was wondering if there might be an example of a metaphor that could be put in the chat or something, but.
So we've got about maybe another 20 minutes, and I'll kind of look to bring it to a close. So do you want to sort of close out your content, and then we can just move to more of an interactive?
Yeah, I wanted to, just see if we can get a couple of things here. And let me move forward. Give me a few minutes here. So just from a personal experience, you don't have to read all this stuff. I'm happy to share it, but a few thoughts around. I'm not too sure about do and don't, but sometimes it helps to contrast stuff a little bit. But just very quickly, do try to find out styles of communication for people. Like, don't just take Agile, lock, stock, and bottom and apply it. Try to make it a little more flexible. Find out what works for people and adapt it a little bit more. Don't just, do a straight, application. You'll see here a definition of done, and making things black and white really helps in whatever forms, whether it's a task, whether it's acceptance criteria, tick, tick, tick. These are all great, make it black and white, very clear. Rituals can really work, but like I said, just keep it flexible and just try to take stock of any differences in terms of communication. Lots of signage, really good. What I mean is just having stuff like burn down charts and, really, the backlogs, everything. There's so much great stuff about Agile, which is all about signposting and putting those signs up front that are very visual. And I think they're really helpful to keep us all on track. So I'm just saying a few things, but make sure, when it comes to, stand-ups and other things, people have got space and time. They may not remember right at the moment. They might need a way to bring something up they didn't think of right in that moment. So have some alternative tools to put up. Maybe it could be a board you can put stickies on or something, and then, don't, again, some of the stuff already mentioned about implicit assumptions or cues or metaphors, as you mentioned, and so on. I won't belabor this. I do have things for myself. So sometimes, to help with this, we have these manuals. They're almost like user manuals, but they're about you. Okay, so this is me. This is how I work. If it helps, I'm going to give you a user manual to Marc Goblot. I'll give you that at the beginning when we're trying to understand each other as a team. And maybe that's good for everybody to do, just understand people's traits and, so that you can adapt the Agile a little bit better. I just need a lot of clarity with instructions and by when do you need it. If you just spoke to me and gave me instructions verbally, it'll go straight out my ear. I need it written down, whether I do it or somebody else. Anyway, I'm just saying, this is just one way we can look at doing our personal manuals that could really help in making things a lot more inclusive up front, and then how we might highlight some of the Agile principles or tweak. Last bit is just quickly, the neurodiverse IT. So if I may, just quickly, 3 objectives, straight out of Matthew's pen. We want to help the IT industry tap into that diversity of thought. So many ways to do that, the benefits. We want to support neurodivergent individuals in the industry in all these ways on there, promote peer support. So many ways, careers, advice, and so on. Educate IT organizations. Talk to yourselves too. Raise awareness, how it can contribute to broader society. So as I said, talking to yourselves, talking to government, talking to the NHS. I've spoken to the police. I've spoken to DWP. All these people. That's something about us. We have our contacts. We've got a webpage in BCS. We've got our Twitter now. We've got our LinkedIn page now. And we have a LinkedIn group. We can share all these afterwards, but just quickly wanted to let you know, our AGM's on the way, events on the way, and Matthew's on this call. He's the chair. That's kind of our working. So I was given this background at the last moment. Here, try this in the background for your LinkedIn and Twitter. So I'll leave you with a visual. I did. Craig might know where this. I forgot now where this came from in our group, but I'm kind of done with my content. I didn't know if Matthew, you want to say anything quick about the group yourself?
Yeah, if you're happy for me to, if there's enough time, I'll be brief. Yeah, thank you so much, Marc. Really appreciate that, and the whole talk and for your introduction. Yeah, the group is fundamentally open for everyone because we want everyone to be engaged in this, but is run by and for primarily neurodivergent people. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a diagnosis at all, but people who are, identify and realize they're experiencing the world differently from most other people. And I think IT as a profession has actually been a pretty good place relative to other professions for neurodivergent people. And particularly these areas of rapid development and these kind of exciting edges like Agile, even more so maybe. So I really appreciate the support from this group, and I think it's great. And I'd really invite anyone who's interested to explore and reach out. It's often a new idea to people. So, you know, we're not expecting people to have all the answers or understand how their brain works or everyone else's before they start participating. But really, we're exploring it together, and I'd invite everyone who's interested to join us. So thank you.
That's great, Matthew, thanks. And I think that was really much our driver and motivation for, you know, doing this session with yourselves, because I think the reality that I think many of us see and face is that, you know, we need to continue to educate ourselves and to help other people to understand, you know, what neurodivergence means and the different, you know, variations that there are, and, you know, what are the differences, and how do we use all that understanding and gain knowledge to make the workplace more inclusive. I think that's really why I was keen that, you know, you guys came along, and thank you both, and Mark, well, thank you to you for doing the talk. And, you know, there's lots there that I think I learned, and I think the reality is there's lots there that I think I need to learn more about, and I think that's really the kind of, I think, the driver motivation for this. We have about 10 minutes or so. Quite keen to open it up to some questions from the group. It's quite a small group. I've had a few folk drop off for various reasons. We will circulate the recording and get it up on our page as well, and share all that, so we'll promote it after. But if you want to stop sharing, if you're happy to do that, it'd be nice just to see everyone and see whether there's, you know, there's any questions. Dave, you got your hand up. Feel free to unmute.
Yeah, thanks. Firstly, that was absolutely great. That was one of the best talks I've been to from BCS in a very, very long time. So thanks very much for that. I've been chatting to Matthew very, very sporadically over the past couple of months. I've been meaning to write an article for IT Now on neurodiversity and apprenticeships. So we employ some apprenticeships. We employ some apprentices at HPE in Bristol. We've got about half a dozen or so. And what I'm keen to explore, Agile as well now, obviously, but how that transition from education into employment works. So making sure that there's like comfortably 3 or 4, maybe a few more different kinds of stakeholder in an apprenticeship, from the apprentice themselves, the employer, the training provider, mentors, coaches, a few others as well. And to make sure that the support mechanisms are in place and that the processes are in place and everyone's on board with doing the right thing with neurodivergent people who are looking to shift from education not just into work, but into an apprenticeship in particular, from my own personal interest point of view. So Mark, so Matthew, I know I've been really, really quiet on this lately, but I'm back. And Mark, I've been really keen on getting involved. Mark, I saw you speaking in Parliament a couple months back as well. That was great. I didn't get an invite to the dinner, so have fun with that. But I'll definitely, if we can see the slides.
To you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I'd be very keen on grabbing the slides from this, by the way, if that's possible, because I know that the recordings of these can take a while. So if we can see the slides early, that'd be great as well. But thanks very much, everyone concerned. This has been really, really good.
I appreciate your feedback, Dave. And yeah, we'll definitely get the content circulated. I'll work with Mark to get the slides made available, and we'll work with HQ to get the recording up on our page as quickly as we can. And once it's up there, you know, the committee we'll share that and make people aware that it's up there and available for folk to watch it back. So I appreciate your input and your positive comments on the session. Are there any other
sorry, just before, I just want to say, Dave, by the way, we met at the round table in Plexol with Policy Connect as well, and I've been meaning to get in touch with you, so it's a great way to do that.
Yeah.
So sorry. There you go.
Well, that's great. And again, it's why we like to do these things, to bring people together and
connecting
everyone, and can then go off and, you know, take things forward, and we all look to play our part in improving things. Any other questions, folks? Maybe 5 minutes or so, then I'll bring it to a close. feel free to unmute, raise your hand, however you want to just get my attention, and we'll lead you in. Any other bills? Because I might have missed some in the chat. So was there
There
anything?
was another hand up, I think, too, somewhere.
I mean, Elle asked a great question earlier that I'd really like to hear from others on, and also like to share my own perspective on a little bit around some people prefer for neurodiversity to be covered in the same bracket as disability and difference and the legal protections and all of this. And I think from my perspective, neurodiversity is such a broad concept that it actually covers both real kind of significant differences in capability that are a genuine problem for people, and also just variations as well, and sometimes in the same person. So it can kind of be both, I think, is the slightly awkward answer to that. And really teasing these things apart and these aspects of it is one of the big challenges. But really significantly, as Marc said, addressing where there are systemic barriers to people just doing their thing, but also saying that for people with high support needs, there are really big challenges, and we don't want to, but actually fixing the things for everyone tends to make things better for everyone, even when it's just the people at one far end. So addressing these things is a helpful thing for everyone, regardless of what level they fall on that.
Could I just comment on that and on another question? I haven't really got a question, but there's a couple of things that I've been dying to sort of respond to. So on that question about disability, I got my diagnosis of autism a couple of years ago, and on the back of that, my daughter was diagnosed, and it's been a very positive thing for her. And she would be much more eloquent about all these issues. But I think one of the problems with the wording that's used and the sensitivities around it is that the word disability has such negative connotations, and I think we would help everyone with both visible and non-visible disabilities if we just got over the problem with that word. I think with some parents, for instance, who have children with these conditions, I think they don't like to think of their child as being disabled, and then they talk with them as being superpowers and so on, which I think comes from a kind place, and it's all well intentioned. But I just think it makes people think that disability is a bad thing, and I don't mind if my condition is. I haven't adopted the ASC name. It's ASD as far as I'm concerned. But the other thing I wanted to mention was that someone asked about, I think, something to do with spotting undiagnosed neurodiversity in colleagues and so on. What I would say is, if my diagnosis was as a result of a bad workplace relationship where I felt I was essentially coerced into a diagnosis, and unlike Marc, the jury's still out for me as to whether it was a good thing at my age to get a diagnosis or not. There are some good things, notably my daughter's diagnosis, but I've still got some personal stuff to work through myself. But if you're in a workplace, if you think a colleague of yours has got some neurodiverse condition, they may know that they have, and they may have chosen not to disclose it, and it's up to them whether they do or not. And if you have suspicions and raise them with them, and they have a condition that they're not aware that they have, you could be doing them a disservice by putting that thought into their mind. So I would just say we need to be careful with people who we work with. If we have suspicions or not, it's not necessarily our place to raise the issue. I'm not sure I said everything I meant to on that, but I hope that made sense.
No, I think that's a very good call on it, Andy, actually, because I think I've seen some not dissimilar things. Dave, you got your hand up. Did you want to chip in there?
Yeah, just in response to Andy's, or I think Andy's vanished, I'm not sure. Just in response to Andy's point there, so something Matthew just said, in fact, I imagine everyone else is already thinking, is that by making things better for everyone, we make things better for everyone. So I guess the answer to my question is, rather than saying, I now want to be in a position that I can identify unidentified things in my colleagues and peers, what I should be thinking instead is, let's just make the workplace and the work environment better for everyone, and then the question doesn't really matter. So thanks for that, Andy.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
I like the way you phrased that. Matthew, do you want to chip in? Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just add a little bit quickly. Yeah, Andy, I completely agree, and I think for me, you know, where we do want to support our colleagues, it's about identifying specific needs, and that's actually true whether or not you know whether someone already has a formal diagnosis, because there's so much variation within these conditions that it can be really unhelpful to expect that a certain person will need a certain thing. You know, a lot of us on this call have talked about being autistic, and I'm autistic, but how that might work could be very, very different between us, and to the fact that we might have opposite needs. And so there's a real danger of kind of overfitting with this, that we can predict too much from a diagnosis as well. So I think breaking it down into those individual needs and focusing on that, regardless of whether there's a diagnosis behind it, is probably the easiest way to work with that. And just like you said, Dave, that becomes a design question, and just how do we make it better for everyone?
Yeah, there's just you know, we're getting to things like traits, individual things, you know, that are, you know, useful. I just very quickly, I think I get also that very much. I think Andy, I heard you speak about ability and disability at another webinar, which is really interesting. And you know, it's quite a difficult one to grapple with, although I do prefer the social model, of course, to turn it around. There are others who try a little too hard to emphasize, say, ability by like putting uppercase A, you know, as almost a defensive thing too. So sometimes that can go a bit haywire as well. When they're kind of overdoing it. And the other thing is interesting in terms of words too, is disclosure. Even in the House of Lords, another session I was at, there was, and this was about university students going into work, and whether there's a need to disclose. And somebody in the audience I was with saying, why does it have to be disclosed? It's like it's an imposition. Why can't it be termed share rather than disclose? Because when you think through the semantics, disclosure is almost something you do under pressure, under demand. Whereas if we made it more positive, it would be something you share, you know, on your own, in your own right, as opposed to something you must do as a regulation, you know. So these are all things to kind of think through as well. And it was just an interesting point there. Sorry.
No, it's great. No, I think that's probably a nice point to finish on, because I think the terminology is important, isn't it? And I think helping people to make use of the right terminology, or not be misinterpreting things, or, you know, using, I guess, terms which might create the wrong connotations or the wrong interpretations is very important. And I think that's where ongoing education comes in, and collective understanding. And I think maybe it was Andy that used the phrase, I can't now remember, but it was really nice. It was I think it was around, you know, if we make it, you know, good for everyone, then it is kind of good for everyone. No, I totally support that. Well, I think we're right up in time there. I am going to bring it to a close there.